Hello, good morning once again. Time check is 1:33 a.m. and the world is really sleeping right now, but I'm still wide awake. I like this time of the day because of the quiet, the peace and quiet that I enjoy doing this, recording this. No dogs barking, no people walking around, stuff like that. So I hope you hear a little of the music to give us company. So we're back, and tonight gonna be talking about where we left off. So the last time we discussed the factors that affect cross multicultural communication. So that includes the inability to understand one's culture, values, and beliefs, the lack of acceptance of the culture of a person, or the attitude, or it could also be the prejudice or the bias within that person. And number four, the lack of education or limited exposure. And lastly, the language barrier. So, moving on, let's discuss ethnocentrism. So, ethnocentrism, as the Webster's Third International Dictionary defines it, is as a habitual disposition to judge foreign peoples or groups by the standards and practices of one's own culture or ethnic group. It is a belief that one's own practice is the proper way of life. So people from another country tend to judge those coming from other countries based on their standards, cultural practices, values, and beliefs. Thus, the tendency to look down upon the culture of other peoples, resulting in inaccurate assumptions. Thus, those who have not been exposed to other cultures may have the tendency to impose his or her own beliefs, or they find it challenging to relate with other people belonging to another culture and result in a gap in the relationship. So, for example, if um, I'm a Filipino and I had access to science and education, the internet, for example, then I go to India, then most of the women there do not use sanitary napkins. You would rather face shame than be exposed to or to talking about these topics in public. So they would rather get sick than put into shame. So, but for me, since I'm educated or I had known the importance of proper hygiene, I can just openly talk about it or recommend it to women. But for them, they find it like a perversion. It's a taboo to talk about women things. Exactly. So we watched a movie, The Padman. If you are interested, take a take your time to watch that movie. It's an Indian movie, and it's a true story about a person who really wants to help women during their period. So he invented something that makes sanitary napkins affordable to little to the remote areas in India, across India. Okay, so that's ethnocentrism. As belonging to a certain group, we feel that we are better than the other groups. So whether it's a basketball game, uh, or it's what they call this in politics or in as a race, for example. So that's why we love to cheer Gilas Pilipinas in basketball because we are Filipinos. They represent us. Even though we know that we talk about skills, they don't fare well compared to other European teams. So that's one example. Then ethnocentrism could be a source of bias or prejudice that may hence affect relationship and communication in an intercultural setting. So to illustrate, the negative prejudgment and dislike of food from other countries is an example of ethnocentrism. And for example, we dislike Indian food, for example, because of too much spices or too spicy in that sense. So we tend to compare them with our own dishes, which is actually not uh, not a positive trait in that sense. So that's an example of ethnocentrism. So for instance, the Indo-Chinese people love to eat raw vegetables, which the Filipinos may be a practice that would not be too welcome. Even in my own family, for example, they just love to eat meat and fried stuff rather than raw vegetables. I think I'm the only one who can eat raw ampalaya, raw lettuce, or eat carrots raw like Bugs Bunny. So I'm trying to infect them with that kind of a lifestyle, but I don't find much of a success doing so. Okay, so what are the other possible effects of ethnocentrism or to intercultural and global communication? So first of all, we have this bias. So what is bias? Bias is the inclination, predisposition, or partiality towards something. Bias connotes a favorable impression towards a culture or belief. Thus, the effect of bias in a relationship or communication situation is something positive. So, for example, we take the case of Pemberton, who has been released lately. If we are Americans, we would be biased towards Pemberton because he is an American. So we would probably thank Duterte for giving him a pardon, something like that. On the other hand, when you talk about prejudice, it is the opposite of bias. It is defined as an adverse judgment or opinion formed beforehand without even the knowledge of the facts. So the effect of prejudice to communication is negative. So in the sense that a person may have an adverse prejudgment of another person coming from another culture, thus could hinder intercultural understanding and communication. So for example, if a person talks about, let's say, purity, and you know that the person has a case of rape, then we tend to feel prejudiced towards the person because we might say that's hypocrisy, talking about holiness and purity, and that person has already a record of impure things like rape or other illicit relationships. So that's one thing. Or like person who has cases of corruption and talks about clean government. So we tend to be prejudiced against a person, or simply because the person doesn't belong to us, doesn't belong to our group or to our community or country. So that's prejudice. We are prejudiced towards foreigners, for example. We feel like they need to adjust to us than us adjusting to them, for example. Another thing is discrimination. So it is the unfair treatment of a person or group as a consequence of an adverse judgment or opinion of a culture. For example, the Jews were discriminated by the Germans or the Nazis Even though it's not about something you have done or you said, but it's about being who you are. So also with the black people as being discriminated in the US, like in the 1960s, they were not allowed to sit together in the bus along with the whites. They are not allowed to use the same toilet or eat in the same restaurant. So that's an example of discrimination. It's an unfair treatment. On the other hand, we have loyalty. Loyalty is ethnocentrism can cement loyalty within the same social grouping, like in the case of fraternities. Even if the member commits an error, we tend to show our loyalty because of ethnocentrism to that person. So it can cement the loyalty within the same social grouping or people belonging to the same society. So for instance, the world football games had straightened loyalty among the competing countries, since the tendency is for people to support their own team. When we watch the Olympics, it's country against country. So whenever we had a representative, even if we don't really know the player that much, we tend to cheer with that representative. And that's loyalty. Miscommunication is affected by either bias or prejudice, so positive or negative. So bias for another culture could create a positive impression, thus facilitate better communication. On the other hand, prejudgment of one culture brought about by the prejudice could lead to misunderstanding. Then we have division. The opposite of loyalty is there is division. Unity could be achieved among different cultures under a situation where prejudice abounds. If people have adverse assumptions about foreign peoples or groups, this could adversely affect communication and thus lead to division, or even worse, a conflict, or at the extreme, even war. So God hates division, especially in the church. So that's why Paul has been always reminding the Christians in his letters to the churches to really be united in what they do, or else Satan would attack them by causing divisions. So what causes division? It could be gossips. That's why gossiping is sin. What else? Unfaithfulness or sin, for example. Okay, what do you mean by cultural relativism? The concept of cultural relativism implies that a person's beliefs and practices should be perceived by others in the context of his culture. So this means also that means not judging the culture of other people that are not the same as yours. So similarly, we should appreciate the cultural practices of other societies in the context of their culture. So for instance, the Filipino food balut may be disgusting for other cultures, but one would learn to appreciate it by knowing the nutritional value of the balut. So thus, understanding one's belief and practices would require a study of his or her culture. So a related situation is the issue of whale catching. So while many countries and worldwide organizations forbid the catching of whales, other countries engaged in the practice would not find this acceptable, since it was been a part of their culture for generations to catch whales. So thus, the question is, who should set the standards for right and wrong? Like I think it was in Mexico, where they allow bulls to run in the street and allow participants to run along with the bulls, and some of them would end up attacked by the bulls. They were caught by the horns and would cause accidents. injuries, or even death. But since it was allowed by the government as a form of a festival, well, we cannot say that that's crazy. So we also have lots of crazy practices that other countries would probably laugh at. For example, we have that Black Nazarene, where people would really go out in the street and join the parade, but it's really because of the big number of people. It usually causes some stampedes or some people collapsing. So instead of praying there for health, they go home with a lot of injuries, and some of them would even die of heart attack or other stuff like that. So somehow, if you really have faith on something, you don't need to be there, and you don't need to really physically touch an idol just to have that kind of faith, right? So for some people, they find it they don't see the logic for putting your life at risk by joining that kind of a parade. Why not worship on another day? Why not worship at the comfort of your own home and pray? So that's one of those questions that other people would find uh, stupid or crazy, but they cannot do that because it's our own beliefs that makes the Filipino a Filipino, as many would think about it that way. So, but nowadays more and more people are studying the Bible and living their Catholic lives. But still, based on the numbers, Catholics still outnumber a lot of Christians or Muslims for that matter. Okay, so even within the Philippines itself, we are composed of different cultures like the Muslims and the Bisaya or the Tagalogs, which have their own different sets of beliefs. For example, we don't most of us don't experience fasting during Ramadan, but Muslims do it. So we cannot just judge them that they are uh, killing themselves by skipping meals. But that's a point of cultural relativism, which is not a good idea. So for cross-cultural communication to succeed, again, it is helpful for one to think about the culture of other countries in such a way that we could appreciate their practices in light of their beliefs, not comparing in that belief with our own. Okay, so I remember a story about a young girl who went to school, and the teacher said, okay, draw something. Then the child, since she grew up in a farm with her grandparents, drew himself catching butterflies and killing them. When the teacher saw the picture, the teacher said, oh, this is bad. Why do you kill butterflies? So the child went home a bit confused because her grandparents always tell her to catch butterflies and kill them because it's bad for the produce, the crops. They eat the cabbage or leafy vegetables. So that's why they are considered as pests. So when the child told the grandparents about it, they just the couple just looked at each other and told the child, well, your teacher is not a farmer, so she won't understand. Okay, so because of different upbringing and situation. Then we have cultural appreciation, which happens when a person attempts to appreciate and study about another culture for one to widen his understanding and relate with others in a cross-cultural setting. So cultural appreciation could facilitate cross-national cultural understanding and communication, like what most missionaries do when they enter the Philippines. On whatever city they belong or they are serving, they learn the language. So in YouTube, you can find Caucasians who are really good in speaking Ilonggo. I remember way back when I was a waiter at Claude's Le Café de Ville, we have uh, Americans dining with us with our restaurants where we work, and it's so funny because we speak English to them and they speak to us in Bisaya. Because they were missionaries, they've been here for like 20 years and they've been working with the natives, so they have to learn the language. So that's a cultural appreciation. We see a lot of videos on YouTube where different nationalities are dancing our Philippine dance or singing in choir our Philippine songs. So these are part of cultural appreciation. Next, we have cultural appropriation. What's the difference? Cultural appropriation is taking one component of a practice belonging to another culture and using it for a purpose. So, for instance, buying an ethnic clothing from the natives in the mountain province and using it to make someone look fashionable without knowing the appropriate occasion and its meaning. When this clothing is used may be offensive to the ethnic group. So the call for us is understanding the culture of others and sensitivity to their beliefs and traditions. So we cannot just take something and apply it to our own without really understanding it. I remember there was this a brand of clothing named Kimono, I think. And when the Japanese people heard about it, and the kimono, the brand name is Kimono, but they were selling bathing suits, like mga two-piece items. So when the Japanese heard about it, they protested because they said kimono is used as a decent form of clothing and not for something so sexy. Okay, so next we have observe the following examples of cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. For example, Angelina Jolie visited Pakistan surrounded by women in hijabs. So wearing hijab, wearing one herself is a means to fit and show respect towards the culture. So this is where Mocha was bashed because she entered a mosque in Marawi without wearing a hijab, even though it was ruined by the war, but still it is a mosque, and Muslims protested that she is still a woman and should therefore wear hijab entering there. Okay, so another example here is we have Katy Perry apologized for acknowledged that she did it wrong in regards to two separate performances where she was accused of cultural appropriation. Performing at the American Music Awards in 2013, Perry dressed as a geisha and wore a full kimono, tabi socks, lacquered hair, geiku pancake, and heavily powdered her face. And in 2017 for her video This Is How We Do, the singer sported cornrows in her hair. So I won't ever understand some of those things because of who I am. You'll never understand, but I can educate myself, and that's what I'm trying to do along the way, Perry said in a podcast interview. And next, we have cultural practices and their roles in communication. So how do they play a role in our communication? So cultures have different sets of behaviors and practices that are unique to their own. So to have a better grasp of a message in the communication process, one has to be aware of a certain culture and tradition being practiced by a community. So these practices reflect and guide on how they should act, talk, and behave. So the habits that we repeatedly do and the customs that we practice are unique shape the way we are unique, and they shape the way that we communicate. So in the Philippines, for example, we have the mano po, which is traditional and customary practice of showing respect to the elders. You know where it came from? It came from our elders kissing the hand of the Pope or the hand of the priest. Not the hand, but actually it's the ring that they are kissing on. So our mano po is actually was developed because of that practice. So this is done by the younger member of the family to reach out the elder's hand, place it in one's bowed forehead. This is a sign of humility and respect, as well as a form of acknowledgement of someone's age and position in their family. So we even respect our brothers or sisters who are just a year older than we are. We call them ate or kuya, uncle or auntie. But in some other countries like the States, you can even hear a granddaughter calling her grandmom by their first names. Like, Linda, can you please give me some candy? And it's a granddaughter calling her grandmother, which is in the Philippine setting, we can't imagine children doing that. Like instead of calling your mom mama, you call them by their first name. You know, Rosa, ngayo ko baon. So I remember when one of my children, we were in the table and one of my children said, "Ma, too big be, too big be." He was scolded because of that. How many words? 3 words. Because it's improper. It doesn't show courtesy at all. So the greetings all over the world are, as culture is very widely and varied. There are different ways to show as to how people greet each other. Apart from handshaking that most people do in a greeting, here are some other ways people greet each other all over the world. Of course, we're talking about these things before the COVID, because after the COVID, it changed a lot on the way we greet people. Instead of shaking hands, we just do punch or elbows, or they just bow to each other, just say hi. Okay, so for example, in Japan, they greet each other with a bow. So this is also a form of respect for the elders and those who are in high position, especially in business. Bows have different angle and duration, so depending on the person they are greeting. So not only that, the angle and the duration of the bow also communicates a certain kind of message. In Oman, men greet each other by pressing their noses together. They do this with eye contact to prove and show their sincerity and full respect, which is when we appropriate that in our culture. It might sound a bit strange or weird at first, probably. The Malays, or people from Malaysia, usually stretch out their hands and touch the other person's fingertips. And then they bring their hands to their hearts. It symbolizes that they are greeting you from their hearts. Wow, very touchy. The Tibetan monks stick their tongue out to greet people. They also press the hands together and place them in front of their chest to show that they come in peace. They started doing this to prove that they are not the reincarnation of a cruel king from the 9th century that had a black tongue. See? history has something to do with it. Okay, so these are our sources, and this is activity number 1. Part 2, okay, is to determine whether this is ethnocentrism or cultural relativism. If you don't understand that, you can always go back on top to check the definition. Make sure you understand them. Okay, I think that will do. Oh no, let me see. Probably we can have this answered as a form of our quiz. No, I'll just make another quiz based on ULO, A, B, and C. So from that time until this time, I'm gonna probably make a quiz for Friday. Okay, so I'm giving you time to study and review these things. Okay, regarding the submission of the grades, the submission of the first exam, try to post it in the LMS. If not, send it to my email account, rodsazon2 at gmail.com. Please don't forget to include the code where you belong. The group members and leaders, please include screenshots of permits and the grade of each member, maximum of 10 points. Okay, if you want it confidential, you just send it to my Gmail. Okay, so have a pleasant morning. I'm gonna be probably today until Friday, gonna be checking your work and making the quiz. So God bless, and see you next time. Bye bye.